There are two ways this story can be told: the one that makes you look like a monster, or the one where a good person made a mistake. You get to decide which one it is. That line might sound like something written for a movie, but it reflects a very real tactic used in interrogation rooms. It's not random, and it's not emotional improvisation. It's calculated. Every word is chosen with a purpose, designed to guide a person's thinking in a specific direction. And that's what makes real interrogations so different from what most people expect. This isn't about shouting matches or dramatic confessions under a bright light. In reality, interrogations are structured psychological processes. They are carefully planned interactions where investigators use behavior, timing, and language to influence how a person responds. It's less about intimidation and more about control. Control of the conversation, the environment, and the pace. Before any questioning even begins, investigators spend significant time preparing. They review available evidence, study timelines, and identify what information they need to confirm or challenge. This preparation phase shapes everything that follows. The goal is not to ask random questions, but to guide the conversation towards specific areas where inconsistencies or admissions may emerge. When the individual enters the room, the setting itself is intentional. Interrogation rooms are typically plain, quiet, and free from distractions. There are no windows, minimal furniture, and often a fixed seating arrangement. This controlled environment is designed to limit outside influence and keep the focus entirely on the interaction between the investigator and the person being questioned. The process usually begins with what is known as an interview, not an interrogation. This is a critical distinction. An interview is non-accusatory. It is meant to gather baseline information and observe how a person communicates when they are not under pressure. Investigators pay close attention to speech patterns, body language, and overall demeanor. The goal is to understand what is normal for that individual before introducing more difficult or specific questions. During this stage, questions are often broad and open-ended. The person may be asked to describe their day, explain their relationship to certain individuals, or walk through events in their own words. Investigators are not just listening to the answers. They are analyzing how those answers are delivered. Changes in tone, hesitation, or inconsistencies may later become important. But at this point, nothing is directly challenged. What makes this phase so important is that it sets the foundation for everything that follows. It establishes a rhythm, builds a level of engagement, and gives investigators a reference point for behavior. Without this baseline, it becomes much harder to interpret reactions later in the process. As the conversation progresses, the structure begins to shift. Questions become more focused, details are revisited, small gaps in the story are explored. This transition is subtle but deliberate. It marks the point where information gathering starts to move toward assessment, where investigators begin deciding whether the situation requires a more direct approach. By the end of this initial phase, investigators are not looking for a confession. They are looking for direction. They are identifying whether the information aligns, where pressure points might exist, and how to move forward strategically. Every response, every pause, and every detail contributes to that decision. And it's at that moment, when the tone changes and the strategy becomes more defined, that the real interrogation begins. Once investigators decide to move beyond information gathering, the tone of the room changes. The conversation becomes more controlled, more direct, and far more strategic. This is where confession-driven methods come into play, most notably the approach commonly known as the Reid technique. Developed in the mid-20th century, this method is built around a clear objective: move the interaction from uncertainty to admission. Unlike the earlier phase, where behavior is observed, this stage assumes a direction and begins applying psychological pressure to reinforce it. The shift is not chaotic or aggressive, it is structured, with each step designed to limit resistance and guide the person toward a specific outcome. The first major tactic is direct accusation. Investigators present the situation as if the conclusion has already been reached. They may state with confidence that the evidence points to the person in the room. Whether the evidence is strong, partial, or still being developed, the delivery is meant to create a sense of inevitability. The goal is to disrupt denial early and establish psychological pressure from the start. From there, the strategy pivots into something more subtle but equally powerful. Investigators begin introducing explanations that reduce the perceived severity of the situation. This is often referred to as minimization. Instead of framing the act as something extreme or unforgivable, it is presented as understandable within certain circumstances. The language shifts toward empathy, suggesting that the situation could have happened to anyone under similar pressure. This tactic works by changing how the person interprets the consequences of speaking. Instead of viewing a confession as the worst possible outcome, it begins to feel like a way to explain, justify, or regain control of the narrative. It lowers the psychological barrier to admitting involvement, even if only partially at first. At the same time, denial is carefully managed. When a person tries to reject the accusation, investigators do not allow the conversation to settle there. They interrupt, redirect, or reframe the discussion. The intention is to prevent the person from reinforcing their denial internally. Over time, this can create a sense that resistance is not leading anywhere, while engagement might. Another key element is the use of repetition and persistence. The same themes are revisited from slightly different angles, reinforcing the idea that the outcome is already understood. As this continues, mental fatigue can begin to set in. The controlled environment, combined with sustained focus, can make it increasingly difficult for a person to maintain the same level of resistance over time. Eventually, the process moves toward a critical moment, presenting a choice that is not really a choice. Instead of asking whether something happened, investigators offer two explanations for how it happened. One is framed as more severe, the other is more understandable. Both, however, involve admission. This reframing shifts the decision from denial versus confession to choosing between two versions of involvement. Faced with that structure, a person may begin to engage with the question rather than reject it entirely. Even a small acknowledgement, agreeing with part of the scenario or correcting a detail, can mark the first step toward a fuller admission. From there, investigators work to expand that acknowledgement into a complete account. What makes this approach so effective is not any single tactic, but how they work together. Control of the narrative, reduction of consequences, management of denial, and strategic framing all combine to guide the interaction in one direction. It is a method designed to break through resistance by reshaping how the situation is perceived. By the end of this phase, the goal is no longer just conversation. It is commitment, a statement that can be developed, documented, and used as part of a case. But as powerful as this approach can be, it also raises an important question. Is pressure the best way to get the truth? That question leads directly into a very different method, one that replaces confrontation with conversation and pressure with precision. While confession-driven methods focus on applying pressure, a completely different approach emerged in the United Kingdom during the 1990s. It is known as the peace model, and it represents a fundamental shift in how interrogations are understood and conducted. Instead of assuming guilt and working toward a confession, this method treats the process as information gathering first and foremost. The peace model is built around 5 stages: preparation and planning, engage and explain, account, closure, and evaluate. Each stage is designed to reduce confrontation and improve the accuracy of the information being collected. The emphasis is not on forcing an outcome, but on building a complete and reliable account of events. Everything begins with preparation. Investigators carefully review all available material before the interview takes place. This includes statements, timelines, physical evidence, and any background context relevant to the situation. The purpose of this stage is not just organization, but strategy, deciding what needs to be clarified and what gaps in information exist. Once the interview begins, the focus shifts to engagement. Instead of immediate pressure or accusation, investigators explain the process clearly and establish the purpose of the conversation. The tone is calm and structured. The goal here is to reduce anxiety and encourage cooperation, creating an environment where the person is more likely to speak openly and consistently. The next stage is the account phase, which is the core of the interview. The individual is asked to provide their version of events without interruption. Open-ended questions are used to encourage detailed storytelling rather than short answers. Investigators listen carefully, taking notes and allowing the narrative to develop naturally before responding. Only after the full account is given do investigators begin to explore specific details. If inconsistencies appear between the statement and known evidence, they are addressed carefully and without confrontation. Instead of directly accusing the person of lying, investigators may ask clarifying questions that invite explanation. This keeps the conversation active without escalating tension. A key feature of this approach is that it avoids forcing a single direction too early. The interviewer does not start with a conclusion and work backward. Instead, they allow the information to guide interpretation. This reduces the risk of assumptions shaping the outcome and helps ensure that the final account is as accurate as possible. Once the discussion is complete, the closure stage ensures that everything has been clearly understood. Investigators summarize the key points, confirm details, and allow the individual to clarify anything that may have been misunderstood. This helps prevent misinterpretation and ensures the record is accurate before the interview ends. Afterward, the evaluation stage takes place behind the scenes. Investigators review the information collected and assess how it fits with other evidence in the case. This determines whether further interviews are needed or whether the information is sufficient to move forward. What makes the peace model distinct is its foundation. It does not rely on pressure or psychological confrontation. Instead, it is built on structure, communication, and accuracy. The idea is that reliable information is more valuable than quick admissions, especially when the goal is to avoid mistakes that could lead an investigation in the wrong direction. By focusing on cooperation rather than resistance, this method represents a very different vision of what interrogation should be. And when compared directly to confession-driven techniques, the differences become even more significant. At this point, the real question isn't just what techniques are used in an interrogation room, but why they work at all. Whether it's a pressure-driven approach or a conversation-based model, both methods rely on one central factor: human psychology under stress, uncertainty, and authority. Confessions rarely happen in a single dramatic moment. In reality, they are usually the result of a gradual shift in thinking. A person may begin an interrogation fully committed to denial, but over time, that position can weaken for different reasons, depending on the method being used. In high-pressure environments, mental fatigue becomes a major factor. Long questioning sessions, repetition of themes, and emotional strain can make it harder for someone to maintain consistent responses. As exhaustion builds, decision-making can shift from strategic to reactive. Another psychological element is perceived control. When individuals feel that every possible outcome is already decided against them, they may begin to see confession not as an admission of guilt, but as a way to regain some control over the situation. Even if the confession is incomplete or partially framed, it can feel like a way to end uncertainty. This is especially true when the conversation is structured in a way that limits alternative explanations or narrows perceived options. On the other side of the spectrum, rapport-based methods rely on a different psychological mechanism entirely. Instead of pressure, They focus on communication and trust. When a person feels heard and not immediately judged, they are more likely to speak freely and provide detailed accounts. This increases the amount of usable information without necessarily pushing toward a confession. In many cases, inconsistencies or critical details emerge naturally through extended conversation rather than confrontation. Memory also plays a significant role. Human recollection is not fixed like a recording. It can be influenced by time, stress, and the way questions are asked. Open-ended questioning tends to produce more accurate and complete memories, while leading or suggestive questioning can unintentionally alter how events are recalled. This is one of the key reasons why modern investigative psychology places so much emphasis on careful phrasing and structure. Authority dynamics are another important factor. In an interrogation setting, the presence of authority can significantly affect how a person responds. Some individuals may become more compliant under pressure, while others may become more guarded. The way investigators manage that dynamic, either by increasing tension or reducing it, directly influences the flow of information. What becomes clear when comparing these approaches is that there is no single trigger for a confession. Instead, it is a combination of environment, communication style, emotional state, and perception of consequences. Each interrogation method simply emphasizes different parts of that psychological equation. This is why interrogation remains one of the most complex areas of criminal investigation. It's not just about asking questions. It is about understanding how people think when they are under pressure, how they process uncertainty, and how they decide what to reveal or withhold. In the end, every interrogation strategy is built around the same reality. The truth is not extracted in a single moment. It is shaped over time through interaction, psychology, and interpretation. And whether the method is based on pressure or conversation, the outcome always depends on how human behavior responds in that controlled, high-stakes environment.